The year 1863 marked a turning point in the American Civil War. The Confederacy had seen early victories, the South had momentum, but the tide was about to turn. The Union would soon find its footing. This would be a long and bloody struggle. The outcome of the war was still uncertain, but the final years of the conflict would determine the fate of a nation. They would redefine the meaning of freedom in America. The Battle of Gettysburg, fought in July 1863, was a turning point in the Civil War. This three-day battle was the bloodiest of the war. It resulted in heavy losses for both sides. The Confederacy, led by General Robert E. Lee, suffered a crushing defeat. Lee's army was forced to retreat back to Virginia. The South would never again invade the North. The Battle of Gettysburg marked a turning point in the war for several reasons. It shattered the myth of Confederate invincibility. It boosted Union morale after a series of setbacks. It also gave President Lincoln the opportunity to deliver his famous Gettysburg Address. On July 4, 1863, just one day after the Confederate defeat at Gettysburg, another major blow struck the South. Vicksburg, Mississippi, fell to Union forces under General Ulysses S. Grant. This victory gave the Union complete control of the Mississippi River. It effectively split the Confederacy in two. The fall of Vicksburg was a strategic victory of immense importance for the Union. It cut off Confederate supply lines and isolated Texas, Arkansas, and Louisiana from the rest of the Confederacy. The victory also further cemented Grant's reputation as a skilled and determined commander. He would soon be called upon to lead the Union Army to final victory. In November 1863, President Lincoln traveled to Gettysburg to dedicate a national cemetery at the battlefield. His Gettysburg Address, delivered on that solemn occasion, was a masterpiece of brevity and eloquence. In just a few powerful words, Lincoln redefined the meaning of the war. He framed it as a struggle not just for the Union, but for the very soul of America. Lincoln began by invoking the principles of equality and liberty upon which the nation was founded. He spoke of the unfinished work that remained to be done in order to fulfill the promise of a government of the people, by the people, for the people. Lincoln's words resonated deeply with the American people. They continue to inspire generations of Americans with their message of hope, sacrifice, and the enduring power of democracy. Section 5. Grant's Rise, a general for a new kind of war. In 1864, Ulysses S. Grant was appointed General-in-Chief of all Union armies. Grant brought a new level of aggression and determination to the Union war effort. He understood that the war could only be won by completely crushing the Confederate Army and its resources. This meant waging total war, even if it meant higher casualties and destruction. Grant's strategy was to apply relentless pressure on the Confederacy on all fronts. He would target not only Confederate armies but also their supply lines, infrastructure, and civilian morale. This brutal but effective strategy would ultimately lead to Union victory. Section 6. Sherman's March, breaking the back of the Confederacy. In the fall of 1864, General William Tecumseh Sherman embarked on his infamous march to the sea from Atlanta to Savannah, Georgia. Sherman's army cut a wide swath of destruction through the heart of the Confederacy. His soldiers destroyed railroads, burned crops, and looted homes. Sherman's goal was to break the South's will to fight. He believed that by making the cost of war unbearable for civilians, he could force the Confederacy to surrender. Sherman's march was a controversial episode in the war. It left a legacy of bitterness and resentment in the South, but it also succeeded in demoralizing the Confederacy. It hastened the end of the war. Section 7, 1864, Lincoln's re-election and the hope for peace. The year 1864 was a pivotal year for the Union. The war was dragging on, and war weariness was setting in. The outcome of the presidential election was uncertain. Lincoln himself doubted his chances of re-election, but the tide of the war was turning in the Union's favor. The fall of Atlanta to Sherman's forces in September 1864 gave Lincoln a much-needed boost. Lincoln's re-election in November 1864 was a referendum on the war and on Lincoln's leadership. The re-election of a president during a civil war was unprecedented. It showed the world that the Union was committed to seeing the war through to its end. It also gave Lincoln a mandate to pursue a just and lasting peace. Section 8. Appomattox, the end of the rebellion. By the spring of 1865, the Confederacy was on its last legs. Lee's army was surrounded at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. On April 9, 1865, Lee surrendered to Grant. The terms of surrender were generous. Grant allowed Confederate soldiers to return home with their horses and sidearms. He also ordered his troops not to celebrate. The war was over. The surrender at Appomattox marked the end of 4 years of bloody conflict. It also marked the beginning of a new era for the United States, one in which slavery would be abolished, and the country would begin the long and difficult process of reunification. Section 9. Legacy of the War, a Nation Transformed. The American Civil War was a defining moment in the history of the United States. It was a war that tested the very fabric of the nation. It left an indelible mark on the country, both physically and emotionally. The war resulted in the deaths of over 620,000 soldiers. It left countless others wounded or maimed. The war also led to the end of slavery in the United States. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution, passed in January 1865, abolished slavery in the United States. Lincoln did not live to see the full impact of this momentous change. He was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth on April 14, 1865, just days after Lee's surrender. The American Civil War was a tragedy for both the North and the South. It was a war that could have been avoided, but one that ultimately had to be fought. In the end, the Union was preserved, slavery was abolished, and the United States emerged as a stronger and more unified nation.